So buyer and seller consultations. Like I guess before we get there, I would say that the term on the business, right, really applies to, just the top of the sales funnel is a common way that it's referred to, where, you have, your database of people that, you're then tasked with um quote unquote lead generating to. So lead generating to a database is a pretty common concept, hopefully by now. And communicating with them, interacting with them, essentially all of that to say just strengthening the relationships that you have is the first part of your job. And when I say like job, the punch in, punch out, grab your lunch pal, put on your hard hat, get to work type of stuff on a daily basis, it's all about building relationships that essentially then turn into leads, right? Because as get into this, consistent interaction and flow with your people, you're going to create leads. You're going to generate leads. You're going to find opportunity of people that you can help or that need help or that have a want, a need, a desire to buy, sell, invest, rent, have somebody that they want to refer, just anything real estate related. It's not necessarily a lead, but keep in mind that you're doing your job if somebody calls you and asks for a referral to a plumber because they've got a leak in their bathroom on the second floor that's coming into their kitchen. They thought of you for something real estate related, even though it's not transactional. So like just keep that in mind that you're doing your job, at a pretty high level if you get that call from somebody that that you've been quote unquote lead generating to, and they come back around and you know think of you for something to do with the roof over their head. From there, you identify these leads, you're organizing these leads, and the intent is to work with them, right? And keep in mind that a lead can happen in the form of, you know, Johnny Jr.'s graduating high school in 5 years, and we're going to be moving south after that. Like, that's a lead. Yeah, it's unfortunate that they're not ready to transact right now, but that's a lead. And how well you organize yourself and systematize yourself to be able to keep tabs on that person for the next 5 years and provide value to the relationship and provide value to their real estate plans really comes down to whether or not you're going to convert that lead into business. One of my takeaways from family reunion from Phil Jones was, we typically think of pipeline as a 30, 60, 90-day pipeline, but why not think of it as a 30, 60, 90-month pipeline instead? How much more effective can you be if open up your business organization and planning um to be able to like, have that intention to help people that are looking to transact, 7.5 years from now is the approximate math on 90 months versus like only focusing on what's in front of you right here, right now, that is the likelihood to be a paycheck as soon as possible. Now, don't get me wrong, like prioritize. Like obviously you want to, treat your business in a way to where like those people that are going to transact soon have a higher priority than those that are going to transact 5 years from now, and those that are going to, there's no lead, there's no inklings of them wanting to transact. But your job becomes to cover the relationship with all of those people from, just somebody in your database that isn't doing anything and somebody in your database that's planning on doing something 5 years from now, and obviously the people that are looking to do something immediately. So just food for thought on how to, how to think of your database, the people in it, and how to organize the people. But you're communicating, you're lead generating, whatever you want to call it. You create opportunities, you create leads. Then the objective becomes, okay, how formal can we get with, getting to the point where we've gone through a process and there's a mutual intent to where you both want to work together. Like they want to work with you based on how you've gone through this consultation process, and you want to work with them based on what you found out and what they're willing and agreeing to do. And that's where we're going to spend some time on from here. The before we get into the process itself, a couple things that I'll note would be I mentioned formal. It doesn't need to be like a consultation to work with a buyer, seller, or investor does not need to be like, hey, you have to come into my office or we have to meet at Starbucks or at your house. And, like this long drawn out meeting that's, 2 hours long to get through this process that I'm going to describe here in the bulk of this call. And, just understand that you have the ability to consult at a formal level without being, in front of somebody at an office table or their kitchen table or, on a Zoom or at Starbucks or whatever. So keep that in mind that, like, yes, you want to bring formality to the consultation process on your end, but it doesn't need to be like this, hey, we need to meet, or the script of like, hey, when can we set a time to do a buyer consultation? It's just a matter of like you getting through the steps based on, the timing that's in front of you right then and there. And if, they're not available for an hour, then that's okay. Just, kind of close to the next step and know where you're leaving off and be diligent about having a process on your end that essentially is a goal for you to execute on everything so that you can come out of it with, again, this mutual, the whole goal is that there is like mutual, we're all on the same page to work together from here. That's ultimately the goal of a consultation is that you want to work with them. They want to work with you. They're willing to do what you're telling them needs to be done in order to reach your goals. And, you're working by an agreement and they understand compensation. That's the whole goal to this. Okay. So just keep in mind that doesn't have to play out in the form of an hour-long meeting in your office. Now, don't get me wrong, like, you know, a formal sit down type of conversation is, you know, a method of a highly efficient way to go about this, but it's not always appropriate, is my point. And it's not always something that other people want to do. Just think of the world that we live in, right? And it's, people would rather get things done in their pajamas at home than like have to, put on makeup and worry about looking good to be in public to come meet you at your office. So adapt to that so that you can, have versatility to accommodate those that you're talking to and trying to work with and able to convert at a higher level. The other thing that I'll say is all the steps that we're going to go over here doesn't need to happen all at once in terms of you like just pushing the conversation to get to the next step type of mentality, but more so and I'll talk about this in depth, but more so it should be, you're not moving on to the next step of the process till you check the appropriate boxes, get what you need to accomplish in the step that you're on. And again, I'll talk about this at length, but essentially so far, like formal consultations, yes, it needs to be formal in terms of what you're looking to get through, but it doesn't need to be formal all the time to where it's like, hey, let's meet at my office for an hour and a half. So just understand that, you kind of, figure out how people want to go through this process with you and then accommodate it. And then also, it's not about when you're in that moment to like, you know, blast through all of the presentation when it doesn't make sense to move on to the next step. The other thing I'll mention before we dive into these steps that I keep referring to would be it's very, very important to understand the personality type that you're dealing with. And, this is why KW um, has the resources and constant offerings of the disc assessments and personality assessments and all that type of topic, right? And I'll kind of poor leadership on my end, I guess, but like I'll be vulnerable to admit like it's a very, very dry topic, right? Like going through that disc profile type of course and assessment and just for yourself or for just being able to learn about the topic itself. Like it's dry, at least my personal opinion. Like it's a tough topic to like get through and to fully understand. So it's not all about like, you can pass the test or the quiz at the end of the course of like, list out all the characteristics of a high D personality and what's an S and what's a C and what's an I. But coming out of that, you should be able to know how to communicate with whatever personality type is in front of you. Because, for example, you're going to need, like, if you're in front of that high D personality, that type A type of personality, and you're trying to get real deep with them on a personal level, and they're more like, dude, get to the point. Stop asking me all these personal questions. How are you going to help me? Like, that's important to know and important to get a read on before you dive in and get into this process. So I'll take a pause here because next I'm going to talk about the process itself. But does anybody have any questions, anything they want to add, before I keep rambling here? Okay. So three-step process. And this, if you remember, if you were here last year around this time, maybe it was April, but what was the course that they put out? Value Squared, I think it was called. That came out, really in response to everything that was happening NAR lawsuit wise and the changes that were coming and ultimately, how you going to go about providing value in order to work with people by agreement and have the compensation paid out that you're looking to get. This three-step consultation process, was very much I don't want to say established, but reiterated during that presentation, that whole push, if you will, from Gary Keller, Jason Abrams, Jay Papasan, the typical brain trust of the company here that we have to, that we have available to just copy and paste from. So, context wise, like, I wasn't in the lab last night, like whipping this all up myself. Like this is just, essentially public to KW anyway, information that you guys can refer back to and tailor a strategy that makes sense for your way of doing business. But step one of the process would be essentially all about them. Okay. And what's most commonly referred to as the formal, step of that process would be a needs analysis. Right? So whether it's a buyer, seller, or investor, step one is essentially like, you know, finding out what they need, what they want as well, what their goals are, right? But like it's all about them. Within this step of the process, the only thing that should be coming out of your mouth is either a question or like uh-huh, yep, got it. I like that too. Oh, I love that town. Oh, I love that style of home. Yep. Those, it's either questions or just, whatever you want to call that, exchanging a pleasantry type of communication, right? But you're not rambling at this point. You're not telling them what they need to be doing at this point. You're finding out everything that you need to find out about them while also building the rapport. This is like the trust building step. This is the like relationship building step. This is this is your time to shine, without really having to literally shine because, people like it when you're making it about them versus making it about their paycheck or your paycheck, I'm sorry, to start off with. So you could build a lot of trust and a lot of, significance to the relationship when you're just focused to start with of all about them and not like, well, here's what you need to be doing in order to work with me. Here's what you need to be doing in order for me to get paid is the danger zone of how it comes off when you don't do this. So, it's a matter of asking questions that are relative to you finding out that you know, a successful process of this step is essentially like, okay, yeah, thanks for, everything you've told me so far. I'm pretty sure we can make that happen. Like your goal in this step of the process is to essentially find out as much as you can to where after that conversation, you're left with like, yeah, game on, we can make that happen. Or if there's, a gap from what they're telling you to what you know is realistic, there's no point in moving on to the next step of telling them about the process that they need to go on in order to reach their goals. Because if somebody, relative to the Rochester market, if somebody's telling you like, yeah, I want to buy $100,000 house in Pittsford, great. Me too. Doesn't exist. That's what you're thinking, right? There's obviously grace and empathy and all that you got to deliver, the reality of the situation with. But, you got to find out that what they're looking to do, what their needs are, is something that you can make happen. Because, there's not really a point in working with people that, formally that is, and spending time and trying to find them a house to buy or showing them homes that they're not willing to be competitive or they can't afford. That's a tough way to run your business if your pipeline is filled with people that you're not confident are going to be able to transact. So this first part of things is a matter of like you leaving that step and that conversation with, yeah, no, we can make this happen. Let me tell you how is the next step. But guys, just think who, what, where, when, why, how, right? Those questions, fill in those blanks. Like if anything, like have a mentality to where like that's a checklist that you're trying to fill in a blank for each of those categories of who, what, where, when, why, how, and being left with like, okay, yeah, no, this all sounds good. You got your head screwed on straight. We're going to be able to make this happen. That's step one of the process. Now, like to really get in the weeds with this, I would recommend that you embrace that relationship building and that trust building type of aspect immediately to start via the questions that you're asking. So rather, for example, rather than just to jump into, all right, where do you want to live? How many bedrooms and bathrooms do you need? And what price range do you want? As the first thing that comes out of your mouth versus, hey, so you're looking to buy a home. Who's going to be living there with you? Tell me about your family. I don't mean to get personal. We just met, but like, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about your goals. Right? When you come to the situation or when you come to the conversation with like you're treating them like a human and not a transaction, you're gonna let their guard down and you're gonna build that trust um, naturally and organically versus just jumping right into like, we got a transaction to do. Tell me what your criteria is. Like, I got to set up an MLS search ultimately from this. Tell me what boxes I need to be filling in. So anything that you can do to establish the relationship before you get into formal like real estate realtor, discussion type of stuff is going to go a long way and is going to be a huge help to that, again, trust building, relationship building, like just they want to work with you because you're a good person and not just treating them like a piece of meat that's a paycheck to you. So this first step of things is all about the relationship and knowing that you're able to help them based on what they're looking for or what they're looking to do and how they're looking to do it, right? Because you know trying to help somebody who when you boil down the numbers with them, they want to buy a home in a suburb with a $600 a month payment and they've got a couple grand to work with. It's going to be a tough go on your end, as you know. So it'd be important to find that out right from the start versus like, yeah, I want to buy a 4-bedroom house, you know, uh, in this location and I need 2 baths. And, I'm thinking that I'd like to spend up to whatever, 400,000. The one thing I'll tell you as far as the like um whatever you want to call it, a hack of um just a tactic, a tip of the financial side of the discussion that plays out in this step and really at all times rather than just like, hey, what price range are you comfortable with, or hey, like go talk to the lender and come back to me and let me know what you talk about. Like be a partner to their life and establish that, hey, yeah, this is going to be your home. I want you to love it. I want you to, picture yourself raising your family in it and all that, and Christmas morning and all that sort of stuff, right? But also, I need to make sure that you're financially protected as a result of me representing you and us, of you buying this home. So rather than just like, hey, what's your price range? Or have you talked with a lender and why don't you do that and then come back to me? Two questions to ask. What are you comfortable with per month to own this home that you want to buy? And, the way I phrase it is I'm not asking what your life savings is, but just what are you comfortable with bringing to the table in terms of cash out of pocket in order to close on a home that you're going to purchase? That's going to be a huge qualifying question that tells you a lot. Because again, if they're like, hey, yeah, I want to spend $1,200 and I've got $5,000 and they're, inquiring on a $500,000 home, that math doesn't math. And now it's time to like dig into that and figure out, okay, that we got to kind of fill this gap here. Like, here's what that payment and that out of pocket expense would lead to typically. And it doesn't add up to, the type of home that you're telling me you want. You should be having that conversation versus a lender. Because if you didn't, and the approach is just go talk to the lender and let me know what you guys talk about, you're disconnected at that point. You didn't really provide the value to, properly represent them, in my opinion. So keep that in mind on the financial side of it. Any questions about step one? All about them, needs analysis, who, what, where, when, why, how, their situation. All right. I'm killing it. So moving on to step two. At this point, it's okay. Yeah, I can work with that. We can make that happen. I've found out enough. I'm ready to move on. Now, keep in mind, back to the personality type stuff, right? You know, different personality types are going to depend on how long you stay in that step. Because again, that high D, that type A, whatever you want to call it, you're probably not going to be in a great position if you're talking, if you're trying to grill them with questions for 45 minutes and they're getting frustrated. Like, you gonna help me or not? Like, I'm kind of, I don't really want to tell you personal stuff. Like, I'm here to hire a real estate agent, not a friend. Other people may be looking to hire a friend first that can help them with real estate. So you got to quickly be able to pick up on the personality type that's in front of you and also have effective questions asked to, give you if there is that kind of like they want to move on, they don't want to spend a lot of time with the lovey-dovey type of stuff, then asking effective questions to be in a position where it's like, okay, listen, plenty more to find out, but you've told me enough, like, and I think we can make this happen. So let's now talk about like what it's going to take to reach those goals. Let's talk about the steps that are involved with the process. Let's talk about what I'm going to do to help you reach these goals. Let's talk about, and especially relevant to our markets, guys, like this is the opportunity to talk about the market conditions and what it takes to be competitive as a buyer, for example. Because, okay, great if you have a ready and able, well qualified buyer. But if you don't talk about what it takes to be competitive, and then you're out there in the market and you've spent 3 weekends with them, showing them 3 properties every weekend, and then they finally get to the one that's like, I want to make an offer on this. And they're telling you, like, okay, let's offer them 5,000 under asking price, $1,000 deposit, and an inspection, and I want them to include the hot tub that they're not willing to leave behind. Now you got a whole new set of problems that you got to deal with, right? Versus, you know, with grace, with empathy, so to speak, dealing with as much as you can up front to get to the point where it's like, yeah, I want to work with this person. I'm confident they're going to transact. We've gone through a pretty in-depth conversation, and they've got knowledge on what it's going to take to be successful, and they're ready to go. And like having your pipeline organized to where your hot people or your A's or whatever you call it are, been run through the ringer, so to speak, and spit out with a ready, willing, and able buyer or seller. Because in my opinion, if they're not checking all three of those boxes of ready, willing, and able, it's really tough to transact. So you explaining what you do for them, you explaining what process, what steps they need to take, what, just yeah, it doesn't need to be an hour. Like, you could talk for a long time about the process of buying a home, right? So it's not like you need to get into, this is how title works with an attorney and a 5-minute dissertation on that and title insurance and things like that, right? But it's kind of giving them as much information as is relevant to the process that they're going to be on, and making sure that there's nothing coming up that ends up being you know, a disconnect of their understanding of what they need to do in order to get to the finish line. Excuse me. But very important to talk about this competitive market that we're in, and what it's going to take to be competitive, buyer or seller wise, right? Because if you got a seller who wants to, you know, list with transparent pricing or whatever you want to call it, like that's okay. It's just make sure that they understand what that looks like. And if you got a seller that wants to capitalize on, I'm hearing about all these bidding wars, what's it going to take to do that? Make sure that you explain that in depth to where it's, so if you got somebody who wants a bidding war on their listing, but they got three dogs and they work, you know, more than full time, and they're not going to be accommodate all the showings that are needed to get to a bidding war. You gotta, figure out a strategy that works for their situation. Ultimately, you're leaving this step with, okay, you like they're telling you, like, okay, yeah, you game on, let's do it. All right, like and it may even be like, yeah, I get it. I don't really want to waive an inspection, but I get it. Let's do it. There may be some frustration type of stuff that comes from this conversation, but ultimately them being on the same page of what it takes to reach their goals based on what you're telling them they need to do to do so. But this is like you're the captain of the ship that they're going to go on the cruise with, and you need to make sure that you are the captain and that they're not. Don't get me wrong, like you're there, like they're paying you, right? So in a way, they're the boss. But if you have to be confident to where it's like, if you're going to reach your goals, you're paying me to captain this ship, and I'm going to get you to the finish line. I'm going to get you to your destination. That's the relationship that you need to have. So there's, this conversation that plays out, and this is where you're talking more, right? Like this step of the process. Yeah, still there's some questions asked, right? But like this is where you're going to be doing more of the talking most likely than they will be. And the questions asked are like, does that make sense? You know, you good with that? You on board with that? And you're moving on to the next step of ultimately like solidifying the relationship to work together. Once you know that, again, you can make their goals happen based on that needs analysis. And now they know what it takes to make their goals happen in order to work with you and be competitive in the market. And, the steps that they have to take to do so, and the steps that they need to take in order of timing to have it all play out to their advantage. You're basically at this point both looking at each other like, okay, yeah, let's work together, right? Like, yeah, I hear you. Game on, let's do it. Is what they're telling you, hopefully. And if not, you gotta find a way to figure out um, how they can get to that point. Like, what else do you need to explain? What objections do you need to handle? Um, in order to convince them that your way is going to lead them to their goals. Also, a lot of value that you're talking about that you provide to the process. Questions before I move on to step 3? So step 3 is, essentially at this point, like, okay, you're telling them I want to work with you because I know that what you want to do is more than possible, and I'm confident we can make it happen. And it also sounds like that, you're willing to do what it takes in order to make that happen based on what I've just explained. And sounds like you want to work with me based on what I'm talking about and what I'm telling you we need to do together. Okay, let's talk about how we work together formally. Because that's what I do is I work by agreement. We need to work by an agreement. And this is, what I charge. And this is how, compensation works. And this is what, the term of our agreement is going to look like. And if you're on board with that, game on, let's do it. And obviously, handle any objections that come with, this part of the process of what you need in order to work with somebody. So I guess that's important to have established in terms of like standards of how you run your business and being firm to it to where, it's selective on your end of like, it's like I can appreciate that you want to work with an agent that doesn't charge what I charge, but unfortunately, like I'm running a business here, as you can understand, and I only, like I have to, everything that I just explained is a lot of work, and I want to invest the time into doing that, and in order for me to do that, this is the compensation that I need to work with. So it's okay if that doesn't work for you. I'd be happy to refer you to an agent that maybe doesn't offer, all this value that we just discussed that I'm going to offer and have as much of a plan to get you to your goals that I do. So if you are looking for more discount service type of agent, like, that is out there. I'm not going to lie to you. There's no standard commission. So it is possible to get a discount agent. I'd be happy to, I know of some I can refer you to. But at this point, you're leaving there hopefully with an agreement signed to work together. And with all of that, that was a lot that I just threw up on y'all with. That hopefully brings relevance to why like this may take multiple conversations to get to the point where it's like, okay, yeah, we're signing an agreement. Not everybody wants to be in an office and like, you know, you slide in a piece of paper across the desk of sign here after, 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is. Don't get me wrong, we're in sales, so like any opportunity there is to close right then and there, game on. But you really got to read the room. You really got to read the personality that's in front of you and what they're feeling in order to effectively close. I'm gassed. You guys are up. Questions, thoughts. What do you do? Like this, God, I'm not standing on a pedestal telling you everything I just said is perfect. So if you got ways that you go about it that are beneficial to you, please share. But questions, thoughts, bring it on. Got the 19 minutes available so we can talk about anything. I haven't been on mute the whole time, have I?
No, you haven't, boss.
Okay.
I got a good chuckle in myself just sitting here with my daughter. There's crickets over here. Yeah, I can contest to this because the first 2 years of my business, I had a really hard time converting because I would just entertain anybody and everybody. And now that my business is rolling and up and moving, now I can be a little more selective. Not saying that I cut anybody off. I'll put them in my command to make sure I task them out and stay in touch with them. But the consultation part has been something I've been trying to work on the last few months. So I know who's an A, who's a B, who's a C, and then who just drops down back to a lead.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a topic here to where it's building your business to a point where it's like you're selective to turn down people that don't do things your way.
Right. Like I just had a consultation this morning, and when I was running through it, he said, I'll call you back because, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He didn't understand the market that was up here. He wants to use a lender down in New York City on the ninth floor of the Rockefeller Center. I said, that's perfectly fine if you want a piece of paper, but it's going to be very difficult to get it to close with a single family competitive situation. So, what we were able to do was shift to a multi-family cash flowing investment.
Yeah. No, good because, and again, what I just said of like having a business that's so big that like you're turning down opportunities, like believe me, I realize that that's, like a daunting type of topic and you
Yeah,
know,
I'm not there yet, boss.
even
I'm
unfair
not
for
there
me to
yet.
say, but that's like a goal that each of you should have of like getting to that point, right? But in the meantime, this is why this topic is so relevant for me and if you're in my world, I'm beating it to death. Like it ain't gonna stop anytime soon. But the timing of the year that we're heading into, spring market, right? Like you guys are gonna be busier than you have been in the last 4 months, just organically. So when you think about how this plays out, like let's just say you have 10 people that you're working with this spring, how well you consult and how well you're together, you're on the same page in order to do what it's going to take to work with each other in order to reach their goals. It's a direct correlation to whether or not like you end up getting 5 transactions out of that or 9. And the only one that you didn't out of 10 was because they lost their job. And like obviously nobody was planning on that. But this matters of to how you run your business so that you can convert at a higher level. Because without this level of, detail on your end and purpose on your end, I should say, now you're out there working with, now it's, we've all been there, myself included. Okay. So a lot of this is like, gained from experience, unfortunately. But I know that everybody's, either has been in this boat or maybe in this boat right now of like, oh, I gotta show this house this weekend to somebody, and there's no chance they're gonna be able to buy it because they can't afford it, or it's not gonna work for them. And it's been 6 months of that. That's a tough road for as a business owner to drive on. So this step, this process is how you can, get over that hump in terms of how you're running your business. And I'll acknowledge like it's tough. It's not easy. But it's possible to run your business this way to where there's that much purpose to where, because like you should be turning down business if it's like you don't think you can make their goals happen and they're not willing to operate on your terms. That's set up for a very, very, very low conversion rate of actually getting paid on. And very, very high, rate of, like a miserable experience for everybody. And even if you do close that transaction, are you going to be getting a referral from it based on, how much arguing most likely had to play out throughout the months of working together to get them to understand 2 months after the fact of you started working together and then start breaking the reality of what the process looks like and what the market is and this, that, and the other versus like, gently with purpose of the process that you're in to like let's not work together formally until we're on the same page. Now, the other asterisk to this all that I'll add is like, yeah, get in front of people. Use the non-exclusive buyer agency agreement to show them a house when you don't know if they're ready, or if they're, going to be on board with everything. Don't get me wrong. Like, the more that you can just convert over the phone so that, you're not going to show a house to somebody that's got a 500 credit score and no income, the better. But if you do the light conversion and you feel like either your skill set or your mentality isn't there to take it further, or more important, or as important, that the person you're talking to, is like getting frustrated with talking to you on the phone and you peppering them with questions, and you want to get in front of them to win them over at that point and go through this process, game on. I think most, there's a lot of agents that, just think that, okay, I'm going to get in front of them because then my good looks and charming personality is ultimately what's going to win them over. And we're not going to talk about any of this process that I just laid out. And, hopefully they want to continue to work with me after that meeting or that showing. And, game on, I was able to lock them into an exclusive buyer agency agreement, but we didn't really talk about what they need, what they want, how they want to go about it, and what I need them to do to really, have this be an effective person in my pipeline that I'm excited to work with. So the game is not just like getting an exclusive buyer agency agreement with buyers, or even a listing agreement where it's like, we're listing this house at 400,000, it should be listed at 300. There's no comps to justify 400. That's not success of having those agreements signed. Success is you get a signed agreement to work with somebody formally based on like you're excited to work with them because there's a plan that you're going to execute on together that's going to lead them to your goals that you're confident on.
Jason, I have a question.
Fire away.
I have a client that I'm meeting with this weekend. She wants to sell her house and she wants to buy another house this summer. And she wants to use her VA loan. And last time I had quite a bit of time trying to find, a house for a client with a VA loan. Any suggestions on dealing with that?
Is the lender offering any alternatives? Because there's a lot of great lending programs that even can apply to VA buyers that strengthen their position.
Because normally I go through a premium. I haven't had her reach out to anyone yet because we're just gonna meet, um, to talk about it. But I know she's been talking about it for 2 years, and now
Yeah,
she's like, I'm finally ready to go for it this summer. So I'm just even at the meeting with her in person and walking through the house stage. But it made me a little nervous because I want to be able to
sure.
of course sell it and then have her to find the house that she wants.
Yeah. So I mean, let's just say that you get through the process. She calls, premium. She gets pre-qualified for VA loan. And she's ready to go. The conversation of like, hey, and this is where it's like. The one thing I hate about this business in general and our market specifically is, how much of a, you know, penalty, so to speak, that VA buyers incur. Um, so acknowledging that it sucks, but also, having to acknowledge that aspect and making sure that they're willing to, essentially overcompensate in order to be competitive. Overcompensate meaning like, okay, just like because if you got a VA loan who's willing to be aggressive, VA buyer that's willing to be aggressive, great. If you got a VA buyer who's wants to have an inspection, if they want to go over the hot listings that are going to have competition and they want to have an inspection, they only have $1,000 for a deposit, and they're not willing to use a strong lender, Doesn't
Mhm.
matter if it's VA or 20 conventional 20% down. In that case, they're going to struggle no matter what. So it's acknowledging that, seeing how they
Mhm.
feel, and are there alternatives at that point? And if they're not willing to do what it takes to be competitive, then it's okay. Like it's fine. I understand. Like I hate this market too. I don't think it's fair that I even have to have the conversation with you about waiving an inspection, but I wouldn't be doing my job if we didn't. So we can
Yeah.
have that strategy in place for you to make offers with an inspection contingency. We just need to do that with homes that sell after their delayed negotiation period, or being real purposeful to identify the listings that aren't going to have competition, when they come out of the gate fresh, new listing wise. So at this point, Tammy, what I would say
Uh-huh.
is like go through the process. You're kind of like, don't get me wrong, I get it. It's fair to assume what a roadblock could be, but go through the process, come from curiosity. Take it one step at a time, because you don't even know if they're pre-qualified at this point, right? So it's
Yeah, no.
take that consultation opportunity, and just don't move on to the next step until you've got something that's fairly well organized and you're confident in.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Open forum here for the last 5 minutes, guys. What can I help with?
Hi, Jason.
Where are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So I had somebody reach out to me. They want to buy their, somewhere in Greece, up to 160, 4 bedroom, all the things. I know that that's going to be extremely difficult. And what I was thinking about doing, I have a call scheduled with them next week, but is it ever rude for me to just show them what sold for 160 and below?
It's not rude. It's necessary.
Because I, one,
Exactly what I was gonna say is like show them the data. Like guys, just generally speaking, because and that's a great point. So thanks for bringing it up in terms of like the notion of like being in a position where you're just barking at people, right? And like, hey, take my word for it. Trust me, versus like establishing that trust with like, hey, don't take my word for it. Like, here's the data. So here's, there's been whatever it is, 400 homes that have sold in Greece in the last year, or whatever. Hopefully there's more than that. uh
mhm,
and of those 400 homes, 10 of them have sold below 150. So we're at with that math, we're at you got a 2.5% chance of just identifying a home that you're saying you'd be okay with, that fits your criteria. And within that set of 10 homes, here's what they look like. Do any of these fit?
right. And that's the thing, because before I even get out and get going with them, and it's funny because I heard Sam talking about this, in the earlier stages of your career, you just go and you do it and whatnot. At this point in my career, I'm like, no, it's going to waste their time. It'll waste my time. We're not going to be competitive on a lot of these, just based on some of the conversation I've already had with them. I don't want to put them off, obviously, and be polite with, I want to be polite with them. But on the flip side, I feel like having that conversation, like right off the bat, like, look at
Uh,
guys, I want to help you. I did tell them it's going to take time, to find stuff. Hopefully our market opens up a little bit, but you don't want to step on people's toes and then make them feel, because buyers are already discouraged.
yeah. Well, that's a big topic, right? Of like buyers being discouraged. And I see it on the, whatever you want to call it, the message boards out there, right? And my
Mhm.
argument would be like, would they be discouraged if they spent the time with you over the course of a conversation to find out like what the reality of the market is? No, they would just be like confirming what you told them. And it's a lot less frustrating on that at that point.
Yeah, it almost saves them too, that the frustration, the emotions of going and looking and then not being able to write a good competitive offer.
But yeah, I mean, just you know, you gotta be formally working with people that you're confident you're going to be able to transact with, right? So like that's the filter to run it through. If you're huffing and puffing on a Saturday morning and going out and showing homes to somebody, it's like they got no friggin' shot. That's a problem. And again, I realize the like process of like, yeah, they gotta mess around and find out type of stuff, right? Like they gotta learn the hard way. They gotta learn through experience versus what I'm telling them. But there's a balance to where it's like, okay, yeah, give them one shot, fine. Take that flyer. Hope that everything that you've told them sticks after that. But when it's like, we're writing our fifth offer and hopefully they figure out at this point, that's a problem.
I think it'll let them know too if they're truly ready to be buying in this market.
Well, that's the whole thing. That's your job in this step of the process of, you know, like being a resource to them for them to confirm that they're ready. And if they're not, that's okay. It's not that they're dead to you at that point. It's just okay, let's take these steps here over the course of the next couple of years for you to be ready. Or if it's like, no, I'm not waiving an inspection, it's like, okay, no problem. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna identify opportunities. If you're ready and able to go right now, I'm going to pay attention and identify the opportunities that may come up that you can do that with. Or I'll let you know when this market calms down to where that becomes more of a thing. The problem with that logic is I'm pretty sure it's the same way in Buffalo. Unfortunately, there's no end in sight. Fortunately or unfortunately, there's no end in sight to this current market condition that we have.
I would take this market over a stagnant market.
You guys have heard Anthony say this most likely, but for those that are, have only been in the business 5, 6, 7 years or less, a hard buyer's market sucks even more, guys, because buyers now don't have sense of urgency, and sellers are stubborn. So when they're listing, like imagine a listing, being a listing agent, and you've got a listing on the market for 2 months, and it's urgent that they sell, but they don't want to do what it takes to be competitive to sell. And your buyers are out there like, yeah, we'll see if it's still around next weekend or a month from now. There's other options out there that I can choose from. I want to kind of see those first. We got time. Guys, I got to run. Appreciate your time and hope this was helpful, and we'll talk to you.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.